You clicked because you have a brown bottle of hydrogen peroxide in your bathroom right now, and it cost you less than $1. Keep it close. Because for most of my life, I thought that little bottle was just for cleaning scraped knees. I was wrong. And what I found out cost me thousands of dollars I will never get back. Here is the claim, and I mean every word of it. The Romans figured out the exact same thing that dollar bottle does: whitening, disinfecting, cleaning, healing, 2,000 years before anybody bottled the chemical. They did it with ingredients already sitting in your kitchen. And once I tested their methods with my own two hands, I stopped buying half the products under my sink. I know how that sounds. I used to roll my eyes at ancient history too, but I found it written down in black and white in a book a Roman named Pliny the Elder was still writing the year Mount Vesuvius killed him, 79 years after the birth of Christ. Stay with me to the end, because the last method I found buried in a Roman doctor's field manual for treating soldiers is the one that made me put down the expensive stuff for good, and you can try it this weekend with nothing you do not already own. Let me take you back to the moment this started for me. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was standing at my bathroom sink holding a bottle of whitening toothpaste that had cost me $9. $9. Next to it sat that little brown bottle of peroxide, 39 cents from the same shelf, and a thought hit me that would not leave me alone. What did people do before any of this existed? What did they do before there was a store aisle for every single problem? That question sent me down a road I did not expect, and what I found at the end of it changed how I spend money every single week. Here is the first thing that stopped me cold. The Romans had the whitest teeth in the ancient world, and everybody knew it. Roman writers bragged about it. Foreign visitors commented on it. A gleaming white smile was a status symbol in Rome, the way it is on television today. But there was no toothpaste. There was no dentist with a bright light and a drill. So how did a farmer or a shopkeeper in ancient Rome keep his teeth whiter than most people manage now with a bathroom full of products? The answer is going to make you laugh, and then it is going to make you think. Because the science behind it is precisely what is happening when you use that peroxide bottle. The Romans whitened their teeth with ammonia, and the ammonia they used came from aged human urine. I know. I made the same face you are making. But hold on, because this is where it gets interesting. There was a Roman poet named Catullus who lived in the 1st century before Christ, and he wrote a nasty little poem mocking a man named Ignatius who was always smiling to show off his brilliant white teeth. The insult was that Ignatius, who came from Spain, used urine to brush them. It was a regional custom, and it worked so well that people were jealous enough to write poems about it. Now here's what took me years to understand. Aged urine breaks down into ammonia. Ammonia is a powerful whitening and cleaning agent. It lifts stains off enamel the same way modern whitening strips do. The Romans did not know the chemistry. They just knew it worked generation after generation, and they passed it down. And no, I am not telling you to do what Ignatius did. I would never. But understanding why it worked is the key that unlocks everything else. Because once you see the pattern, you start seeing it everywhere in the Roman world. Which brings me to something that genuinely made me angry once I realized how much money I had wasted. Because here is the uncomfortable part. Somebody, somewhere along the way, made a fortune off you forgetting this. Think about it. For most of human history, cleaning and whitening and disinfecting were things people did with cheap, simple substances they already had. Vinegar, ammonia, ash, salt, sulfur, and then, over the last 100 years or so, all of that quiet self-reliance got replaced by a store shelf with 40 different bottles, each one branded, each one patented, each one marked up 10 or 20 times over what the raw ingredient actually costs. The knowledge did not disappear by accident. It disappeared because there is no profit in you knowing that a 39-cent bottle does what a $9 tube claims to do. Hydrogen peroxide itself is the perfect example. It was first made by a French chemist named Louis Jacques Thénard in the year 1818. For over a century, it was one of the most common household remedies on earth. It was in every medicine cabinet in America. It was cheap. It never really expired the way branded products do, and it did a dozen jobs. And slowly, quietly, it got pushed to the bottom shelf while the expensive specialized products got moved to eye level. Not because peroxide stopped working. It never stopped working. It got pushed aside because you cannot mark up something that costs less than $1. The Romans would have understood this instantly. They had a whole industry built on exactly the substances that modern marketing wants you to forget. And that industry left ruins we can still walk through today. Let me tell you about the Fullers of Pompeii. When archaeologists dug out the buried city of Pompeii, frozen in time under the ash of that same eruption that killed Pliny, they found something remarkable. They found professional laundries called phalonicae, whole businesses dedicated to cleaning and whitening wool and cloth, and we know exactly how they worked because the vats and the basins and even the painted advertisements survived. The Fullers cleaned clothing by treating it with aged urine for the ammonia and then with a special white clay, and they whitened the finest togas by hanging them over frames and burning sulfur underneath them. The sulfur fumes bleached the wool brilliant white. This was not folk superstition. This was a precise, repeatable industrial process, and it produced results so good that a snow-white toga was the mark of a man running for public office. In fact, our word candidate comes from the Latin word candidatus, which means clothed in white, because men seeking office wore togas whitened by exactly this process to look pure and trustworthy. Now, here is why that matters to you. Sulfur bleaching and modern oxygen bleaching, the kind you get from hydrogen peroxide, work on the same fundamental idea. You expose a stain to a reactive substance that breaks apart the molecules that carry color. The Romans did it with burning sulfur. You can do it with a splash of peroxide in your wash. Same principle, 2,000 years apart. But there is a catch, and this is the part that pulled me deeper. Because the Roman method was not just about brightness, it was about killing what lived in the cloth. And that is where I stopped thinking about laundry and started thinking about medicine. You see, the Romans did not have a word for bacteria. They had never seen a germ. They had no idea invisible living things caused infection. And yet they had wound cleaning methods so effective that Roman military doctors could treat battlefield injuries with survival rates that would not be matched again in Western armies for well over 1,000 years. Sit with that. A soldier wounded in the year 100 had a better chance in a Roman field hospital than a soldier wounded in some armies of the 1700s. How is that even possible? The answer is a Roman writer named Aulus Cornelius Celsus, who lived in the 1st century after Christ and wrote a medical encyclopedia called De Medicina, and what Celsus wrote down is astonishing. He described the 4 cardinal signs of inflammation, redness, heat, swelling, and pain so accurately that doctors still teach them in that exact order today. But more than that, he laid out precise instructions for cleaning wounds. And his instruction was to wash them out with acetum, vinegar. The Romans cleaned wounds with vinegar and with wine, and they did it deliberately, and it saved lives. Now we know why. Vinegar is acetic acid, and acetic acid kills a whole range of bacteria on contact, including some of the nastiest ones that resist modern antibiotics. There are hospital studies from just the last couple of decades, real peer-reviewed research testing dilute vinegar against stubborn wound infections and finding it works. Modern surgeons are rediscovering what Celsus wrote down in the first century. And the reason it got forgotten is the same reason as everything else. You cannot patent vinegar. This is the moment I want to talk to you directly, especially if you have been sitting there thinking this is all very interesting, but it belongs in a museum, not in your house. I understand that completely because that is exactly where I was. So let me make this real for you right now with things I promise you already own. That knowledge did not survive because it sounded disgusting to later ages, and everyone quietly agreed to forget it. And what I have come to realize is that this pattern, powerful knowledge, quietly buried, runs through every corner of Roman life, which is exactly what pushed me to dig even deeper and eventually put it all in one place. If you want the full picture of what I found, every method, every source, every tested recipe, I wrote it all down in a series called Roman Roots, Roman Depth, and Roman Blueprint. 3 books built in order that take you from the first principles all the way through to the advanced techniques the Romans used daily. Everything I reference in these videos, and a great deal more that I never have time to cover here, lives in those pages. You can find them linked in the description below, but let me bring you back to the Romans and the uncomfortable truth about who profits from your forgetting. I want you to think about that brown bottle of peroxide again, and I want to walk you through what I actually do with it, because this is the part that saved me real money. First, your mouth. Instead of that $9 whitening product, I mix 1 part hydrogen peroxide with 1 part water, and I swish it around for about a minute, then spit it out and rinse well with plain water. It is the same active idea the Romans chased with ammonia, minus everything unpleasant about their version. It lifts stains and it kills the bacteria that cause bad breath. I do it maybe 2 or 3 times a week, no more, because you do not want to overdo it. That is a few cents a month against a small fortune a year. Second, your kitchen. Plain white vinegar in 1 spray bottle, hydrogen peroxide in a separate one. Never mixed together, always used one after the other. You spray a cutting board or a counter with the vinegar, let it sit, wipe it, then spray with the peroxide and wipe again. Studies out of food safety research have shown that this 2-step method kills more bacteria on produce and surfaces than either one alone and rivals the expensive branded disinfectants. 2 ingredients, a couple of dollars total, and they last for months. Third, your laundry. A cup of white vinegar in the rinse softens fabric and strips out the odor that gets locked into towels. And a cup of hydrogen peroxide in with your whites brightens them the way the Roman fullers brightened those togas, using the same oxidizing principle without a single harsh branded product. I stopped buying fabric softener and half the laundry additives I used to grab without thinking. None of this requires a special tool. None of it requires a trip to a specialty store. It is all sitting in the same aisle where the expensive stuff is trying to catch your eye, just down on the bottom shelf where they hope you will not look. And every one of these uses traces straight back to a principle the Romans understood and wrote down before anyone bottled the chemistry. But I promised you the method that made me put down the expensive stuff for good. And to get there, I have to tell you about the thing that took me the longest to believe. Because there is one Roman remedy that sounds like pure superstition until you look at what modern medicine has confirmed, and it stopped me in my tracks. The Romans and the Greeks before them treated open wounds with honey, not as a sweet treat, as medicine packed directly into the wound. Celsus mentioned it. So did the great physician Galen, who served as doctor to the gladiators in the city of Pergamon before he became physician to the Roman emperor himself in the 2nd century after Christ. Galen treated the worst wounds imaginable, men torn open in the arena, and he used honey mixed with other substances to dress them. For centuries after Rome fell, people laughed at this. Honey on a wound? Foolish old wives' tale. And then modern science took a serious look. It turns out honey pulls moisture out of bacteria and kills them through simple chemistry. It turns out certain honeys produce a slow, steady release of, and here is the part that made my jaw drop, hydrogen peroxide. That is right. Honey on its own generates small amounts of the very same compound in that brown bottle, released slowly right into the wound, exactly where you need it. Galen did not know that. He just knew it worked. Today you can buy medical-grade honey dressings in a pharmacy, and hospitals use them on wounds that will not heal any other way. We spent 2,000 years catching up to a gladiator's doctor. So the pattern is undeniable now. Vinegar, ammonia, sulfur, honey. The Romans built their whole practical world on cheap, reactive, oxidizing substances that do exactly what our modern miracle products do, and they wrote the instructions down where anyone could find them. The knowledge was never really lost. It was just buried under 100 years of marketing telling you it was too simple, too old, too crude to bother with, and the people doing the burying were the same people selling you the replacement. Now let me give you what I promised. The one method I found that made me finally put down the expensive stuff. I found it going back through Celsus, through that same medical encyclopedia, De Medicina, from the 1st century. Most people who quote Celsus stop at the vinegar for wounds. But there is a passage where he goes further, and it is one of the most overlooked things in the entire ancient medical record. Celsus wrote in detail about how the mouth and the throat and infected sores should be treated, and he described using astringent rinses, mixtures built around vinegar and other mild substances held in the mouth, and gargled to fight the sores and infections that plagued people who had no dentist and no antibiotics. Here is the buried gem. The Romans understood that the mouth is the front door to the whole body, and they treated it aggressively with cheap rinses, decades and centuries before germ theory existed. And the specific approach Celsus described, a mild, slightly acidic, astringent rinse used regularly to keep the mouth clean and the gums firm, is something you can recreate this weekend with exactly 2 things from your own kitchen and bathroom. This is what I do, and this is the method that replaced a whole row of products for me. Once a day, usually at night, I take that hydrogen peroxide, diluted half and half with warm water, and I hold it in my mouth and work it gently around my gums for a full minute before I spit it out. That handles the oxidizing, bacteria-killing side that Celsus was chasing with his rinses. Then, separately, on a different day, I use a very dilute splash of plain vinegar in a full glass of water as a rinse, which is the acetic, astringent side he wrote about. I never combine them at the same time, and I always finish by rinsing with plain water so nothing sits on the enamel. What I noticed after a few weeks was the thing I did not expect. My gums stopped bleeding when I brushed. The problem I had been throwing expensive mouthwash at for years, the kind that burns and costs $8 a bottle and is mostly dye and alcohol, quietly went away, treated by a Roman doctor who has been dead for 1900 years for about 3 cents a day. That is the whole secret. Not one product, a principle. The Romans did not have a store aisle. They had a handful of reactive substances and a deep, tested understanding of what those substances actually did to stains, to germs, to the body. They wrote it down. Pliny wrote it down. Celsus wrote it down. Galen wrote it down. Cato and Columella wrote down the household and farm versions of the same wisdom. And it sat there, preserved through the fall of an empire, through the dark centuries, through the printing press, all the way to us waiting for someone to blow the dust off it and try it. I am the neighbor who tried it. I spent most of my life assuming this was trivia for people who liked old statues. I spent good money, year after year, on the modern replacements, never once asking what came before them. And when I finally asked, I found out that the answer had been printed and preserved and available the whole time, and that I had been paying a premium to not know it. Let me leave you with the thing I feel most, now that I know all this. It is not really about peroxide or vinegar or honey. It is the feeling of getting something back that was quietly taken from me, the plain, stubborn self-reliance that a Roman farmer had and that I somehow lost without ever noticing it go. That knowledge was mine by right. It belonged to all of us, and it was tucked away on the bottom shelf, out of the light, so that I would reach for the expensive thing at eye level instead. If you have felt, deep down, that the simplest and most honest solutions have been pushed aside on purpose, that real, tested, proven knowledge got buried because there was more money in your not knowing it, then you and I are the same kind of person. We do not distrust because we are cynical. We distrust because we have been proven right too many times. So here is what I want from you, and I am asking directly because I know this crowd does not always speak up. Out of everything I tested, the vinegar wound wash that Celsus wrote down, the sulfur white togas of the Pompeii fullers, the gladiator honey that quietly makes its own hydrogen peroxide, or that nightly Roman mouth rinse, tell me which one surprised you the most. And tell me this too. What did your own grandparents keep in the house and swear by before the store aisle replaced it? Leave it in the comments. I read them and I test the good ones. If you want to keep walking this road with me, come along, because this is a small movement of people who are digging real, working knowledge back out of the ground, and refusing to keep paying to forget it. The next thing I am testing is the Roman recipe for a cleaning paste that Cato the Elder wrote down for scrubbing the farmhouse, a paste that costs almost nothing and that, when I first mixed it, cut through grease faster than the branded spray I had been buying for years. I want to show you exactly how he made it and exactly what it does. Stay with me and let us keep pulling this lost world back into the light, one tested, buried, brilliant secret at a time. This video gave you the overview, but there's more. Inside the Roman ways circle, I pick up right where we stopped, walking you through the full field manual. If something puzzles you, ask me directly, a real person. Me answers you myself. You won't be doing this alone. You belong here with us. Just point your phone's camera at the code on your screen. You can cancel any time with one click.